It really is great to be here and to have heard Simon and to heard Craig, to see the kites in the air and to see everyone's equipment. It's really a blast. Simon was quite evocative last night in talking about why we do these types of things and all the different reasons. And as Craig says, it makes more of a full house than an interrupted straight. Kite, craft, all the aspects of photography, the putting it together, maybe getting some useful things out of it. So in thinking about tonight, I wondered, what makes an interesting photograph? And surely, as Simon said last night, it's many, many different things. But one is that for me, an interesting photograph evokes an emotion. It might cause us to smile, and I like to think a lot of our kite photographs do that. It might produce angst or care or concern, but the smile one's the one I'm going to settle on. And so I'll call that one the sort of effect, as though seeing a young puppy. That's a nice image. But I think also one thing we might ask of our photographs is that it makes you think. It makes you contemplate something. It makes you try to understand something. And better yet, it might lead you to an understanding. And that I would characterize as the aha, as opposed to the ah. And perhaps the perfect photograph, which was the tagline for this evening, is a photograph that achieves both of these things. That causes you to think in pleasure and then think some more about what was going on. I think a little bit, someone asked a question on my website in the discussion group, which I've enjoyed to no end, about what photographers appealed. And I made a quick list, largely of older photographers. I thought, well, Edward Muybridge comes to mind. And this wonderful set of sequential photographs that explained motion and explained a sequence of time and proved that a horse gallops with all 4 feet in the air. Or I think about Doc Edgerton. So when I was at school, I could go down the hallway and good old Doc Edgerton, the inventor of the strobe and a whole series of other things, would leave his laboratory door open and you could go in there. And he would show you all the apparatus where they shoot the bullets through the apple and burst balloons and do the filming of milk drops. And that was pretty stunning stuff. Or William Garnett. I don't know if Garnett's terribly widely known. I brought this. I'll put it back on the book table. Bill Garnett takes, he's 80-ish now, so I'm not sure he still does it, but for 40 years took medium format images out of light aircraft, largely the California landscape. Or Charles and Ray Eames. Have you seen the film and the book of Powers of 10, which to me was really quite evocative? Or someone that I'm sure no one knows, James Nicholson, who did a series of electron microscope photographs that were evocative. And it seemed that for me, each of these were images that could expand our senses and our sensibilities about things. Each took us into places and compressing time or expanding time or shifting scale that led us to understand the world around us in a slightly different way. So they extended our senses, and that's what I find in my list of favorites. And I can project that into all sorts of prosaic images around us. Satellite images, I can hardly pull myself off of them. I'm Terra Server, for instance, or now MapQuest. I waste an incredible amount of time in MapQuest looking at various satellite images, or a radar image for me. It's just beautiful. False color mapping of these precipitation phenomena. Or I do infrared photography in the long wave infrared regime, and that's stunningly good fun. Our kite aerial photography offers us the same potential of all of these others, the same potential of displacing us, not in time or in scale, but in vantage point. And it's a very slight displacement, just up here, a few feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. But it is really significant. It allows us to see new things freshly and to see patterns emerge that we wouldn't see otherwise. So extraordinary potential there, as I'm sure you all know. It's what you do. Now, every now and then my camera does something that's really sort of fun. If the batteries die in exactly the right sequence, it will take random images. Has that ever happened to you? And so you're up there and you're trying to work a topic, a subject, you're walking around, you think you're making progress doing something, but actually your camera's up there taking random shots. And you bring it back down, and it's an extraordinary comfort to me to find out that these random shots are generally pretty crummy. That they're not, they're just, you look at them and you go, oh, these are terrible. after you figure out why. So it's not just the fact that one puts a camera up there that produces interesting images. You really have to think through the images in other ways. And some of the basics of photography apply. And a lot of that has come out here. Basic photographic principles. The rule of thirds, someone mentioned. It's not a bad rule. It's certainly not a rule that's going to win every situation. It's a lot better than the dead center rule in terms of making an interesting photograph. I think there are issues about ambiguity and indeterminate scale that have worked to great advantage for kite photographers. And the ambiguity is because we're displaced from normal points of view. One looks down and you wonder, well, what is that? And the indeterminate scale means that some phenomena can scale up and down in ways where you're not really sure whether you're 10 feet up or 100 feet up or higher. The figure-ground relationship is a biggie. Imagine taking kite aerial photographs against this carpet. You know, we haven't had to deal with the carpet too much because we walk around, we're on the ground level, we're looking out obliquely. But as soon as you start looking down at things, and this becomes the ground against which your figures are played, you'd find that you didn't get very many favorite aerial photographs in here. And so it is out in the real world, that the texture of the ground becomes a major factor. There are issues of shadow, as Craig so eloquently demonstrates and describes. And everybody has these issues of shadow that show up, and the shadows become more evocative, more real often than the objects that cast them. Silhouette, profile are similar things. There's color, and color is an edge of the day thing for me. You know, if it's F4 and be there, I'd say be there at the edge of the day if you can. Be there within an hour or two of sunset, an hour even, half hour. That rules out dawn for me, I'm afraid. It's just not my kind of thing. So I'm a sunset kind of guy. The abstractions and distillations of images, trying to make things simple. So if you follow those, I think one of the things you do or one of the things I do at least, is I start trying to keep a list of things that I'm shooting and then think, how can I bring those principles to play as I make that list? And it was really fun to hear Craig talk about stalking a subject, stalking a topic. I've got things that have been on my list for 7 years, and I hadn't gotten there, but I will. You know, it's one of those things that, boy, that would be really great if I could do that sometime, and if the wind was coming from the right direction, or I think Brooks and I were stalking the same thing for a while. And Scott and I have stalked the same thing, and he's slaying it much better than I am these days. Goldsmith's flowers we were looking at. I still haven't done it to satisfaction. I want to go back and get the, yeah, right. So it's one of those things that it's easy and fun to think about over a 10 or 20 year time frame. And so, boy, if I've got a meeting that's droning on a bit, as they tend to do, even when I'm leading them, I sit there and sort of doodle notes to myself about, well, how am I going to do that Goldsmith's seeds if I get back down there? What is it better in the spring or the fall or the summer? Should I be thinking 20 feet or 50 feet or 100 feet? Certainly in the golden age of kite photography, when we saw the earlier history pieces, that, because we had no aircraft to give us higher views, that was certainly an era when higher views made sense. Novel, broad, sweeping panoramas. In the current day, I think it's mostly low stuff. For me, below 100 feet, a lot of it below 25, maybe, because things emerge. Well, so my point there is to have an intention, to make lists, to sort of noodle it through, to work on things over the longer haul, the Easter Island project, which rolls on and on. You know, what's the next chapter in that? And then the single most important advice I got as a neophyte was from Craig Wilson, as it turned out. I call him up, Craig in Wisconsin. I said, well, you know, you take these stunningly nice photographs. How does someone get as good at this as you do? And he said, shoot a lot of film. He said, I shoot 75 rolls of film a year. And that is true. If one sets about and says, well, you know, film's not that expensive compared to all the other things that I'm putting into this, I'm going to shoot a lot of film. I kept a little chart. And I was, boy, you know, I'm not going to make my 75 rolls unless I get myself out and shoot a few this weekend. And I think that helped a lot. Just the experience of getting the kite up, framing things. I now have several lifetime supplies of images of the Berkeley waterfront, many of which are not terribly grand. Okay. That said, I've sort of split my images. I shoot mostly negative film, and I do it because I started doing it, for one thing, and I had a little routine where I was scanning these prints to get them on the website. That's where most of my prints were going, most of my photographs were going. I've gone back to slides a bit, so when it comes time to shoot slides, I'm always frustrated. I've got a lot of stuff that would look very odd if I put it in the projector and shined it up at a sort of a brown negative. But I am going to try to illustrate shooting in 3 larger topical areas because I think it's the way I progressed in taking kite photographs. That I went out first, like many, and shot scenes of the natural landscape. And that was sort of easy to find. You go out, there's wind at the shore, there's certainly some nice stuff at the shore. There are relatively few people, unlike Craig Stadium, where if the boat let go and you drop something, I might bean a cow on a very rare day out at Point Reyes, but that was about it. So I did the natural landscape, then I did a bit on the built landscape because I'm an architect and I'm really interested in buildings and the pattern of airflow and how people use buildings. And then finally there's the social landscape. The built landscape, I'll say Brooks' photograph of the walkway under construction. Is that the one out here? No, it is, yeah. It's a wonderful photograph, sort of a process thing. And then the social landscape, Craig didn't show his image of sodas and hot dogs. But that was one of the ones that hooked me in this was this whole expository thing of how one got served a mystery beat in a tubular package. All right, so that said, I've pulled out some of my, some of the slides that I do have, and I'll go through just a few examples in those 3 categories. And so I'll get me to the first one. Yeah. Of late, this is one of those things that took a few years for me to actually get down to it, and I can't tell whether it's in focus. But it's a, and the question is, does it get into focus? Yeah. Yeah. This is a salt pond down in the South Bay, down near Santa Clara. There are a series of salt evaporation ponds that have been there for about 100 years, all told. And they take bay water in, they evaporate it. It's about a 3-year process. They go into increasingly high densities of salinity. And this is sort of an orangey brown water due to halophilic bacteria. And I fly into SFO, I look down, I've been looking at these things for 15 years, and I'm finally trying to find my way down levees to get to them. So here's a little mound of earth. Salt crystals have formed in that shallow saline solution, and we're seeing the brown around it. Next, LV kindly agreed to be my projections. And so here's more of an oblique of this, a little duck hunting shack. We've got a channel here, and this is starting to reveal some of the ways that land has been managed, and it's been really severely managed. That there's a dike there to contain the salt pond. You see a burrow ditch where their big dredge would come through and dig out to make the dike, and then shallows beyond. And then in a channel, a very sort of channelized thing, we have Fremont Creek. And so you can actually see the individual bucket gouges in this salt pond from the dredge, from perhaps 50, 75, 80 years ago. Next. Or a steeper view, which is showing, this is another part of the dredged area. So you see marsh, dike, B, and the orange stuff. Next. And here, the crazing that goes along with the shallow salt evaporation piece. And up above that, you see a little sinusoidal channel. That's the original marsh channel, which hasn't drained as such for probably 80 years. And it's in an area that will be restored to natural land. And it's going to be interesting to see whether these channels come back and what the succession process will be as what has been impounded now for 80 years goes back to free-flowing wetland. Next. Shooting straight down, there are a whole series of abstracts here. And I got a series with a digital camera, which I'm not projecting. They ended up being very nice. It was a series of images from 10 to 15 feet high.
How high are you there?
I think that's on the order of 15 feet. 24 millimeter lens, that's a footprint. So it's not very high. Next. So here, everybody, one of the things you do when you start flying kites is you go shoot your neighborhood. So this is a shot taken from almost exactly above my house, slightly a kilter. You can see Oakland in the background over here. and then the Campanile and the campus. The campus starts in a line, oh, where is it? Right here, right, going through here. So I live just north of campus and walk in. Next. And here's Clark Kerr campus, another little neighborhood shot, which was used to be the college for the deaf and blind, and the university took it over. It is our conference center, so we would be sitting there. Were we having this there? Next. And then here's our Caroline, our Campanile, which I have just hundreds of. I have a lifetime supply of these images. But it's 4 or 5 blocks from my house, and it's an easy place to go fly the kite. And I have relatively few slides, however. But I do enjoy flying up next to this Campanile. I like being there at the edge of the day. I've gotten quite a few now from above it, looking down. I bump into it. I watch my shadows on it. I've come up with all sorts of techniques to approach it gently without getting hung up in the clock hands. I have yet to really price out what a steeplechase costs. Well, steeplejack, I guess it is. Yeah, but there is a steeplejack that services this building, should that be necessary. Next. Well, here's a view, sort of again, looking straight down. The campus picks up a lot of these, and they use them. Next. And then here's a set of shots. This is sort of a built natural landscape. It's an old marsh that got filled in with the rubble of the Alt-6 earthquake and became a landing field for what must have been very courageous pilots because it was a relatively short landing strip in the lee of this ridge right up here where the wind's usually coming right over that ridge and really sort of tumbling in. It must have been an exciting place to touch down. It has now been restored to marshland for about half of it, below where this photograph was taken and behind the camera. And then a great grassy plain has been laid out. And this was the opening day celebration, so lots of people down there in kites. They've decided that the marsh that they recreated is not flushing well enough. It's not big enough to get the flow in and out to keep it open. So I think they're going to start chewing into this grassy field to produce a larger estuary. Next. You are? Very good.
I was there on that day.
Yeah. Who's saying that? Me. Yeah. It was a lovely day, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Bunch of yellow kites. Yeah, right. I know it. Yeah. I thought I'd get a lot of those yellow kites showing up, and they just didn't show up very much. I just saw them in the image here. But yeah. And so here people sort of scattered around the crisscross of a newly established lawn that's not really totally there. Next. Yeah. They were little specks, actually. Yeah, right. But I continued to fly where they flew. We had an understanding they would be over the water and we would be over the land. Yep. These are the cues for the porta potties. So a big row of porta potties here. And so these are the ordered cues of people going to, sort of expressing that social issue of how do you bring several tens of thousands of people to a small place and have them hang out for the afternoon, being festive. And so I started developing a whole story in my mind next about something to do with Peter Lynn's giant gecko sort of stalking the people over by the porta potty. We had this thing going on, which of course it didn't do. Next. It turned out to me that the ground and the figure-ground relationship really wasn't as satisfying here. That for me, I found the mowing marks on the lawn and the fact that it wasn't fully established just sort of kept fighting stuff. Yeah, so not unlike the rug. Yeah, but the kites were very nice, and so I had a whole series of shots that I thought, oh, these would be so much better if I just had a cleaner ground. And next. So like go west, young man. I was hearing go to the desert, young man. This is Corey, who used to live down here. Is that right? Yeah.
He did, yes.
Yeah. Corey was sort of a desert rat in this role, and we went down to the Ivanpah flat, the lake bed, dry lake bed, and took photographs of a red banner project. And Corey's charge was to keep us from perishing outright, and he would sort of slap you around and say, drink this every 15 minutes, which we very much appreciated.
You trusted him to that extent.
You know, he did. He actually did a very nice job of it. Yeah.
You can see the shadow of the lake.
Yes. Now someone wrote me and said, boy, that would be a great photograph if this wasn't here. And it's actually the thing that endears me to the photograph. And then, so kite aerial photographers are sort of a slightly odd lot, but it's one of these things that everything's there and the process is revealed in this little shadow. Yeah. Next.
It would have been nice if he was raising his hand up holding the rig shadow.
It could have been, yeah. So the job here was to go out and to photograph red banners and some red kites against a relatively elemental palette of sky and desert lake bed. And the edge of the day, I think, worked much better than the middle of the day for all sorts of reasons. Temperature, wind, and light, the image. That is a 15, actually. Yeah, I carry. We were talking at dinner about, well, what lenses do you carry? Almost everything I shoot's with a 24, but I carry a 15. I would say maybe 2% of my shots are with the 15, and I carry a 50, and I would say 0.2% of my shots are with the 50.
This is with a Canon Rebel?
Canon Rebel. No video. Next. Let's go forth. Yep. And so plan views of this is a parasled, and there's a rope down here and these red banners casting long shadows. And you start getting archaeological. You think, now what was that? Was that a tire out there, for a while that caused a depression, or huh?
A meteorite.
A meteorite. No, it could be. Except for you would expect scatter from a meteorite, right? And you start looking at this image, you start seeing tire tracks all over the place, which was sort of interesting. Next. Or here's a rope with people down there for scale. And the slide, actually, I can see it up close. I don't know if you can see it from back there, but you can get the pebbly grain of the surface texture, and that's something at a scale of about 4 or 5 inches. Yeah.
Is that the kite flying?
Yeah, that kite's flying.
No, the line going down to the bottom of
Yeah, this is going to a different kite. And this kite is tethered to that little bit of red fabric up there. See the fabric at the end of it?
Yeah.
Which is casting that long shadow. So that's fun. Boy, other than getting really hot, I could go down there about every weekend and do this. It was really a lot of fun. I started making a list, as I do, of things I'd like to haul out on the playa for photographs. And so I don't know if this is a photographing nature or photographing is certainly not the built environment, but it's constructed things. Next. Here are the people I was with, the Scots here and Ali. Yeah, it's one of those images that you have to rotate, click, click, click to see the folks. David Wagner, and I'm forgetting the person at 12 o'clock, who invented the revolution designer, I think. Yeah, next. Well, so one of the things you can photograph out in the desert is you can bring a lot of people out there and photograph it. And so I arranged for 29,000 people to go out to the Nevada desert. This is near Gerlach, Nevada, another big playa. This place is 120 miles long. It's 25 miles wide. The elevation change from edge to center is 6 feet. It is in the middle of nowhere. You go to the middle of nowhere, and you turn north and drive for 2 more hours. It's the place where the world land speed record, which is supersonic, was set.
Black Rock Desert.
Black Rock Desert. And so out there in the middle of nowhere, they gather once a year for something called the Burning Man Festival. 29,000 people this year show up. The only 2 things you can buy there are ice and coffee. So you have to show up with everything imaginable: respirators, goggles, sunscreen, water, just food, recreational supplies, and so forth. And so you show up, they've laid out a little city, you pitch tents, and you stay there, depending on your stamina, for anywhere from a month to a few days.
Do you choose your city?
Well, you can choose your own little location, if you like, or there's something called theme camps. And the theme camps are established groups that are given pretty prime space along the way. And Burning Man, I should say, is about 1/3 creative self-expression. It is vigorous, robust, and entertaining self-expression. Creative art projects and so forth. It's about 1/3 small-town friendliness. How you doing? They'd say. What are you up to? And they'd want to know. That's a nice antidote to modern life in large cities. The remaining third is sort of a hedonistic revelry, writ large, maybe a little bit more than a third. We stayed in something called the Department of Tethered Aviation, which Ty Billings stays. And it's been there for a long time. I think the founders of the department have wandered away from the Kite Way, but it was a fun place to stay because it was on the main drag. Here, next. And so I thought I'd show you some shots of Burning Man. Burning Man's organized around an effigy made of wood, and it's the center part of the little city. And it's at about a 1,250-foot radius from here to the edge of the city. You can see the edge of the city there, and that swings around 270 degrees of the compass. So you get then circular roads, concentric roads, that layer about 6 deep, and radial roads that pivot from the center man out. Next. And they burn the whole thing at the end of the festival. This is the pedestal from this year, so this slide's from not my last CAP session, but the one before that, which was Labor Day. Next. And so here you can go out and start photographing more of a social landscape, the community at large. In this case, though, more of a natural setting. Bicyclist and texture of sand. A lot of wind sweeping going on out there. So the tracks here have been swept away, whatever had existed there before, and it's a fairly pristine bicycle with Craig Wilson shadow. Upside down, right? And I got in a discussion in a group about this image, and we cropped it, we rotated it several different ways, and I have definite thoughts about it. And the definite thoughts to me is if I turn that upside down, the person is leaning downward. See how this wide-angle lens is really showing something of the lateral side of the subject? And when that lateral side is exposed, if it were straight down, I'd agree with you. But because we can see the side, when that's down here, it's like the person's leaning toward the southern hemisphere, and it just doesn't seem quite right. I've tried it.
So didn't David solve the problem by doing?
Right? David leapt in where few others dared to go and made 2 of them with complementing shadows. Yeah. Yes, right. In Photoshop, right? Yes, it was on photo.net. 2, I think. I think I've done this correctly. Doot. Voila. So this has definitely got the Wilson S shadow thing going. But the person's sort of leaning downward to me in a way that's less awkward.
Doesn't trouble me at all.
All right, Brooks says I have to keep it this way. What?
Because a lot of verticals have a definite orientation, aren't they?
Yeah. It is funny. Do you ever keep things in your shop? You've sort of printed them out and you keep rotating them. You know, it's 2 months later and you keep saying, well, I think I'll rotate it 90 degrees and sort of live with it for a while.
Make it Benton style.
Yeah. Okay, well, we can leave it here for the moment. Anyway, I do love the undisturbed ground texture in the notion that the shadow's revealing the shape. Next.
The shadow's so much bigger.
Yeah. This is a structure that's just built out on the playa. And next. This is the main center camp. So I spent a lot of time photographing the center camp because I wasn't near it. And it's a big, really sort of interesting tension structure. They've got riggers that go out and stake this thing out and interleaving canvas panels. A lot of bicycles get sort of parked willy-nilly around the perimeter, and there's sort of a sand painting-esque thing in the middle. Next. And way out at the periphery, beyond the man, is something called, it was the Temple of Sorrow last year. It's the Temple of Joy this year. Looks very much the same. One writes things and on little blocks of wood. This has made the lattice work in this is the leftover punch out from dinosaur kits. So you take sheets of plywood, you punch out all the little dinosaur ribs and stuff, and what's left over is the principal building material for this. And it's very sort of nicely done. Next. There's a view looking downward on it with sort of citizens of the Temple of, and I think I'm actually really close to this, but there's so little contrast that you're not terribly aware of it. And then they burn it. It burns very well. Next, yeah, right. Yeah. There's a pirate ship that sort of showed up there and sailed around the playa during the day. Arr, they would say. Next. I mean, that thing was big, too. And this is the head guru, who's way atop a pedestal, polychromatic, on top of a school bus. This is Larry, whatever his name is. But he's the guy that started it. being interviewed by a journalist. Next. I don't think they ever really picked up on the camera being there. Pseudo flowers in the desert with James Aber's opposition effect. I was most appreciative for the opposition effect explanation on Dr. Aber's site, and here it is in vigor, the little spot that aligns the camera rig with the sun to cast a bright dot. Next. They have a wonderful street lighting system that involves old lanterns, Dietz 300-something model lanterns, and by the hundreds. And so they clean and wick and fill these lanterns at day, and here's someone out at night, or as the evening approaches. No, this is actually the morning. They're taking them down. The lanterns have been collected in a trailer, and you can see some here with somebody with a stick that's lowering the lanterns down. It's a big drill. Next. And the water truck, which is ostensibly for dust abatement, but is the most tangible opportunity for a shower available within 20-something miles. And so people gleefully run around behind this water truck everywhere it goes, myself included. It's my great misfortune that it often shows up while I'm flying a kite, and I finally just said, here, hold this to somebody, and went running off after the truck. Next. Because it's very refreshing. Here's somebody taking advantage of the moment. He did, yeah, which is I'm not sure that's environmentally correct out on the playa. Next. And so a lot of people shots. The people shots are really fun, and that starts getting to be a social landscape thing. People are dusty and funny and often in odd costume. Next.
How high was the camera above him?
Well, for instance, for this one, this guy almost had my lens. I had actually backed up so that he didn't get my little 24.
It looked like 2 feet or less.
Yeah, and like Craig, did you see Craig in the shot of the lamp post? He was there. I'm lurking in shadow form in many of my shots. And I sort of try to stay out, but it's become somewhat endearing. That's my upside down arm extended self. Next. So I backed up so he couldn't grab it. Here's a good late day. Someone cutting a circle underneath the camera for me. Next. People being friendly. Yes. And actually, yeah, right. I wish, you know. One of the things I noticed, though, is you go out to do the social landscape, and certainly in the sense of Burning Man, you start to become part of the social landscape. And one of the things I didn't see on Simon's list is that doing kite aerial photography as a way of meeting people exceeds anything I've ever seen before anywhere. It exceeds walking around with cute babies or having a dog or hanging out in the Marina Safeway. It just attracts people who are come open and curious.
It happened today.
Yeah, right. Next. I think this is almost my closing shot here, but this is a quintessential Burning Man thing. Someone's running around on a motorized hobby horse with goggles and respirator on for the occasional dust storm in lingerie. And I thought, well, there you go. And a tattoo, yeah. Next. And I'll just close here. This was my image about becoming part of the community. So I enjoy dearly going out and shooting these shots. I find that every time I plan a venture and go out and do it, it ends up being a rewarding thing, if for no other reason than going out and flying the kite. But it also just pulls you, or it has pulled me, as has the website, into a whole series of experiences I just wouldn't have had otherwise. So I thank you all.